Rain lashed against bulletproof glass like the fury of heaven itself, each drop carrying the weight of betrayal that hung thick in the air of the $40 million mansion. Inside, a woman 7 months pregnant pressed her trembling hands against her belly, protecting the life within as the man she had loved beyond reason prepared to destroy everything she had ever known. Thunder rolled across Beverly Hills like the drums of war, and in its echo, she heard the sound of her world ending. The silk nightgown that had once made her feel beautiful now clung to her like a burial shroud. The wedding ring that had symbolized forever now felt like a shackle she couldn't escape. She had given him everything: her career, her dreams, her very identity, believing that love could conquer all. Tonight, she would learn that some betrayals cut so deep they reshape the very soul of who you are. But what he didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that throwing away the wrong woman can be the most expensive mistake a man ever makes. Some storms destroy everything in their path, others clear the ground for something far more dangerous to rise from the ashes. This is the story of such a storm. The storm clouds gathering over Beverly Hills seemed almost prophetic as they cast dark shadows across the sprawling mansion, perched high on Mulholland Drive. Lightning flickered in the distance like camera flashes at a red carpet event, and the wind carried with it the scent of rain and change. Inside the glass-walled living room, worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, Sophia Chen Sterling sat surrounded by luxury that now felt as cold as the marble floors beneath her feet. At 7 months pregnant, her delicate frame was silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Los Angeles, twinkling like scattered diamonds in the valley below. The city that had once represented endless possibilities now seemed to mock her with its indifference. Her hand moved unconsciously to her swollen belly, feeling the gentle kicks of the life growing inside her, a life that would soon face a world far different than she had ever imagined. The mansion itself was a testament to obscene wealth and impeccable taste. 40,000 square feet of architectural perfection, designed by the same firm that had created homes for tech moguls and Hollywood royalty. The living room alone could accommodate 100 guests, with its soaring 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors that had been quarried from the same mountain as Michelangelo's David, and furniture that had been custom-made by artisans in Milan and Paris. But it was the nursery that had consumed Sophia's attention for months, a masterpiece of anticipation and love that she had crafted with the devotion of someone who truly believed in fairy tale endings. The room was a symphony of soft pastels and natural light, with hand-carved furniture from Florence that had taken master craftsmen 6 months to complete. The walls were painted with murals depicting enchanted forests where gentle creatures played beneath starlit skies, and the ceiling had been designed to project actual constellations that would dance and shift throughout the night. Every toy in the room cost more than luxury cars, hand-carved wooden animals from Germany, a rocking horse made from reclaimed teak and adorned with real gold leaf, educational mobiles created by child development experts and decorated with precious stones. The closet was already filled with tiny designer outfits from Paris boutiques, each one carefully selected for a child who would want for nothing. Sophia had spent countless hours in that room, reading aloud from leather-bound children's books, her voice soft and melodic as she shared stories with the baby, who kicked in response to her mother's voice. She would sit in the antique rocking chair that had cost $50,000 and dream about the laughter that would soon fill these spaces, the first words that would echo off these walls, the happy memories that would be created in this perfect sanctuary. But tonight, as the storm approached and shadows lengthened across the mansion, those dreams felt as fragile as the crystal chandelier that hung above her head. Ethan Sterling, 35 and devastatingly handsome in the way that only money, power, and excellent genetics could produce, had built his empire with the single-minded determination that separated true visionaries from mere dreamers. Sterling Tech Corporation, valued at $5 billion, didn't just participate in the artificial intelligence and robotics industry, it dominated it. Their patents alone were worth more than the GDP of small countries, and their research facilities in Silicon Valley, Tokyo, and Berlin employed some of the brightest minds on the planet. Ethan himself was the embodiment of the American dream amplified by modern technology. Standing 6'2" with perfectly styled black hair that looked effortless but cost $500 to maintain every 2 weeks. Piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through people's souls to their core motivations. And a smile that had been featured on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, Time, and GQ magazines. He wore custom-made suits from Savile Row that cost more than luxury cars, watches that were works of art as much as timepieces, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no applied to anything he truly wanted. His office occupied the entire top floor of Sterling Tech's headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, a building he had designed to be both functional workspace and artistic statement. The walls were lined with awards, patents, and photographs of him with presidents, prime ministers, and other tech moguls. A scale model of his latest AI project sat on a marble pedestal, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time data from facilities around the world. But the most impressive thing about Ethan Sterling wasn't his wealth or his achievements, it was his charisma. He possessed the rare ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the room when he focused his attention on them. It was a gift that had served him well in boardrooms and bedrooms alike. And it was the weapon he had used to capture Sophia's heart so completely that she had rebuilt her entire life around loving him. Their love story had begun 3 years ago, like something from a romantic movie. The charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel had been one of those glittering affairs where the wealthy gathered to see and be seen while writing checks that would ease their consciences about their extraordinary privilege. Sophia had been there not as a guest, but as a presenter, a brilliant young architect who had just completed her master's degree at MIT and was showcasing her revolutionary design for children's hospitals in underserved communities. At 25, Sophia Chen had been a force of nature disguised as a delicate flower. Born to Chinese immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they had never imagined. She possessed a combination of intelligence, creativity, and genuine compassion that was rare in any industry, but almost unheard of in the cutthroat world of high-end architecture. Her presentation that night had been nothing short of mesmerizing. Using advanced projection technology, she had shown the gathered billionaires how her hospitals could be constructed for a fraction of traditional costs while providing healing environments that actually improve patient outcomes. Her designs incorporated natural light, healing gardens, and spaces that reduce stress for both patients and families. Architecture isn't just about creating buildings, she had said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom despite her nervousness. It's about creating hope. When a child walks into a hospital, they should feel safe, not scared. When parents have to leave their children for surgery, they should feel confident that every detail of that environment has been designed to promote healing. Ethan had been in the audience that night purely by accident. His assistant had double booked him, and he had arrived at the gala expecting a tech industry networking event. Instead, he found himself completely captivated by the young woman on stage who spoke about hope and healing with the passion that he usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. After her presentation, he had approached her at the reception, introducing himself with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to immediate recognition. But Sophia, focused entirely on discussing her project with potential donors, had looked at him blankly. "I'm sorry, should I know who you are?" she had asked with genuine confusion. The question had stopped Ethan cold. He couldn't remember the last time someone hadn't recognized him immediately, hadn't reacted to his name with the mixture of awe and calculation that usually characterized his interactions with new people. Instead, this remarkable woman was looking at him with polite attention, waiting for him to explain why he had interrupted her conversation about pediatric architecture. "I'm Ethan Sterling," he had said, somewhat less confidently than usual. "I run Sterling Tech." "Oh," Sophia had replied with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Technology? That's wonderful. Are you interested in supporting children's healthcare technology? Because I have some amazing ideas about how smart building systems could be integrated into pediatric care facilities." And just like that, Ethan Sterling, a man who was accustomed to being the most important person in any room, found himself completely enchanted by someone who saw him not as a trophy or a networking opportunity, but as a potential partner in making the world better. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of experiences that most people could only dream about. Ethan had thrown the full force of his wealth and influence into wooing Sophia. But what made their relationship special wasn't the private jet trips to Paris or the exclusive dinners arranged at impossible-to-book restaurants. It was the fact that Sophia remained fundamentally unchanged by the luxury surrounding her. When he surprised her with a weekend trip to Venice, she spent more time sketching architectural details in Renaissance churches than she did shopping in designer boutiques. When he took her to a Michelin three-star restaurant, she was more interested in talking to the chef about sustainable food systems than she was in being seen at the most exclusive table in the city. The $2 million Cartier diamond bracelet that still adorned her wrist had been his gift after their first month together, presented during a private dinner on his yacht while they anchored off the coast of Catalina Island. The setting had been perfect candles reflecting off the water, a string quartet playing softly on the deck above, and a view of the stars that was impossible to achieve anywhere near the city. "For the woman who makes me believe in forever," he had whispered as he clasped the bracelet around her delicate wrist, his fingers lingering on her skin as the diamonds caught the moonlight. Sophia had been moved to tears by the gesture, but not because of the bracelet's value. What touched her was the inscription he had commissioned inside the band, Sasi, "You design more than buildings. You design hope. E.S." Their wedding 18 months later had been the social event of the decade. 500 guests at the Four Seasons in Maui, with flowers flown in from 6 different countries and a wedding dress that had taken 8 months to create. The ceremony itself had cost more than most people's houses. But Sophia had insisted that an equal amount be donated to children's charities around the world. "If we're going to spend money on one perfect day," she had said while reviewing the wedding budget, "then we should also invest in making other people's lives more perfect too." The gesture had only made Ethan love her more. Here was a woman who understood luxury, but wasn't corrupted by it, who could move effortlessly through his world while maintaining her own moral compass. She was everything he had never known he wanted: beautiful, intelligent, compassionate, and utterly genuine in a world where authenticity was rarer than the diamonds in her wedding tiara. For the first 2 years of their marriage, Sophia had gladly abandoned her architectural career to become what Ethan affectionately called the perfect wife. She had thrown herself into the role with the same dedication she had once applied to her designs, learning to cook from Michelin-starred chefs, studying wine with experts who had been featured in international publications, and mastering the subtle art of high society entertaining. She had redesigned their mansion's interiors 3 times, each iteration more stunning than the last. She had learned fluent Italian so she could communicate directly with their staff during trips to Tuscany. She had become an accomplished equestrian, a skilled sailor, and could hold intelligent conversations about everything from quantum physics to Renaissance art. But most importantly, she had made their house into a home. The mansion that had once been a showcase of wealth and achievement became a place where Ethan actually wanted to spend time. Sophia filled it with warmth, laughter, and the kind of domestic happiness that money couldn't buy but could certainly enhance. She organized charity events that raised millions for causes close to their hearts. She accompanied Ethan to business dinners where her genuine interest in other people's projects and her ability to ask insightful questions made her one of the most sought-after guests in their social circle. She became not just Ethan's wife, but his partner in creating a life that was both successful and meaningful. When Sophia became pregnant, their happiness seemed complete. Ethan had been genuinely thrilled by the news, immediately beginning to make plans for their child's future. He had called his architects to begin designing an addition to the mansion that would include expanded nursery facilities, a private playground that would rival those found at exclusive resorts, and even a small observatory where they could teach their child about the stars. "Our baby is going to have every advantage," he had said, his hand resting on Sophia's still flat stomach during those early weeks of pregnancy. "The best education, the best opportunities, and most importantly, parents who love each other completely." But as Sophia's pregnancy progressed, something fundamental began to shift in their relationship. At first, and the changes were subtle, Ethan working later hours, taking more business trips, seeming distracted even when they were together. Sophia had assumed it was the normal stress of a successful entrepreneur, complicated by the impending responsibilities of fatherhood. She had been wrong. Victoria Ashford represented everything dangerous about beauty, combined with ambition and a complete absence of conscience. At 26, she possessed the kind of stunning looks that could stop traffic and restart Hart's platinum blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence and cunning in equal measure, and a figure that had graced magazine covers and made grown men forget their own names. As Sterling Tech's marketing director, Victoria had earned her position through a combination of genuine talent, strategic networking, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to advance her career. She had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School, spoke 4 languages fluently, and possessed an intuitive understanding of human psychology that made her devastatingly effective at both marketing campaigns and personal manipulation. Born into New York high society before her family's spectacular bankruptcy when she was 16, Victoria had learned early that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she needed was security, power, and the lifestyle she had lost when her father's hedge fund collapsed and took their fortune with it. The experience of going from private jets to public buses, from designer gowns to thrift store clothing, had left her with a determination that bordered on obsession. Victoria approached relationships like military campaigns, complete with reconnaissance, strategic planning, and tactical execution. She had systematically targeted and destroyed 3 marriages before setting her sights on Ethan Sterling, learning everything about her target's wives and identifying exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. Her first target had been Robert Blackstone, a pharmaceutical mogul whose wife was battling depression. Victoria had positioned herself as a supportive friend, gradually convincing the wife that Robert would be better off without the burden of mental illness. The divorce settlement had been generous, and Victoria had enjoyed 6 months of luxury before moving on to her next objective. Her second target was Michael Harrison, a real estate developer whose wife was struggling with fertility issues. Victoria had convinced Michael that he deserved the children his wife couldn't give him, positioning herself as the fertile alternative who could provide the family legacy he desired. The marriage had lasted 8 months before Victoria grew bored with pregnancy scares and moved on. Her third target was David Chen, no relation to Sophia, a tech entrepreneur whose wife was completely devoted to their autistic son. Victoria had convinced David that his wife's focus on their special needs child was selfish, that he deserved a partner who could prioritize his needs. The divorce had been particularly ugly, involving custody battles that lasted 2 years. By the time Victoria set her sights on Ethan Sterling, she had perfected her approach. She spent 6 months studying Sophia, learning her routines, her interests, her insecurities, and most importantly, her vulnerabilities. She observed that Sophia, despite her intelligence and accomplishments, had a tendency toward self-doubt that stemmed from her immigrant background and her adjustment to extreme wealth. Victoria's campaign for Ethan's attention had been masterfully orchestrated. She had arranged to be assigned to projects that required close collaboration with the CEO. She had coincidentally shared his interests in wine, sailing, and European art. She had positioned herself as someone who understood the pressures of running a tech empire. Unlike his wife, who had abandoned her career to play house, most insidiously, Victoria had planted seeds of doubt about Sophia's commitment to their lifestyle. She had made casual comments about how unusual it was for someone to give up such a promising career, suggesting that perhaps Sophia wasn't as satisfied with domestic life as she appeared. She had questioned whether someone with Sophia's intelligence and ambition could truly be happy in a supporting role, implying that eventually she would grow resentful and leave. "She's lovely, of course," Victoria would say when Ethan mentioned his wife. "But don't you think she seems a little restless lately? It must be difficult for someone with her background to adjust to not working. I just worry that she might eventually feel unfulfilled." Shirini. The psychological manipulation was subtle but effective. Victoria never directly criticized Sophia. Instead, She expressed concern and planted questions that began to eat away at Ethan's confidence in his marriage. She made herself indispensable at work while simultaneously suggesting that his home life might not be as stable as he believed. The affair had begun 6 months into Sophia's pregnancy, during a business trip to Singapore where Victoria had arranged to accompany Ethan for a major contract negotiation. The evening after closing the deal, Victoria had suggested a celebration dinner at the hotel's rooftop restaurant. The setting had been perfect candles, city lights, and enough champagne to lower inhibitions. "You're incredible, Ethan," Victoria had said, her hand touching his arm as they discussed the successful negotiation. "Watching you work today was like watching an artist create a masterpiece. Sophia is so lucky to have a husband who can conquer the world." The compliment had been perfectly calculated, praising his professional abilities, while subtly reminding him of his domestic obligations. When Ethan had mentioned missing Sophia and their unborn child, Victoria had agreed enthusiastically while making subtle comparisons between what he had achieved that day and what was waiting for him at home. "Of course you miss them," she had said with apparent sincerity. "It's just, don't you sometimes wonder if she really understands what you've accomplished? Building an empire like Sterling Tech requires sacrifices that most people can't comprehend. You need a partner who truly appreciates the magnitude of what you do." The conversation had continued for hours, with Victoria skillfully guiding it toward topics that highlighted her understanding of his world and her admiration for his achievements. By the time they returned to their separate hotel rooms, Ethan was beginning to see Victoria not just as a valued employee, but as someone who truly understood and appreciated him in ways that perhaps his pregnant wife couldn't. The physical affair had begun gradually, hands lingering during business meetings, meaningful glances across conference rooms, text messages that became increasingly personal. Victoria was patient, allowing the attraction to build naturally while continuing to position herself as Ethan's intellectual and professional equal. "I've never met anyone who challenges me the way you do," Ethan had confessed during one of their late-night phone calls while Sophia slept upstairs. "That's because we're equals," Victoria had replied, her voice soft and intimate through the phone. "Sophia is wonderful, but she's not your intellectual match. She can't understand the complexities of what you deal with every day. I can." The conversation had been the turning point. For the first time, Ethan began to question whether his marriage was based on genuine compatibility or simply on Sophia's willingness to adapt herself to his world. Victoria's constant presence and validation became addictive, a stark contrast to Sophia's growing need for emotional support during her pregnancy. Tonight, as the storm gathered strength outside their Beverly Hills mansion, Sophia was about to discover just how completely Victoria had succeeded in her campaign. The house felt different as evening approached. There was a tension in the air that seemed to echo the atmospheric pressure building outside. Sophia had spent the day putting finishing touches on the nursery, arranging and rearranging tiny clothes with the obsessive attention to detail that comes from having nothing else to focus on. Ethan's behavior had become increasingly distant over recent weeks. The man who had once shared every detail of his day with her now offered only brief summaries of meetings and deals. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages that he would read with expressions she couldn't interpret before quickly putting the device away. The expensive perfume that clung to his clothes was subtle but persistent, not the Tom Ford cologne he had worn for years, but something floral and feminine. When Sophia had asked about it, he had dismissed her concerns with explanations about new female clients and investors who favored strong fragrances. But it was the way he looked at her that hurt the most. Where once his blue eyes had held warmth and love, now they seemed to evaluate her with the cool assessment of someone appraising an asset. During conversations about the baby, his responses felt rehearsed rather than genuine, as if he were playing a role rather than expressing authentic excitement about their expanding family. The discovery came, as these things often do, through a combination of accident and intuition that proved impossible to ignore. Sophia had been walking past Ethan's home office around 10 o'clock that evening, planning to ask if he wanted tea before bed, when she heard his laughter, rich, genuine, and filled with an intimacy that she hadn't inspired in months. The sound stopped her in her tracks, both because it was so unexpected and because it reminded her of how he used to laugh with her during the early days of their relationship. She pressed her ear against the mahogany door, her heart beginning to pound as she recognized a second voice responding to his amusement. Through the slight gap where the door hadn't quite closed completely, she could see Ethan's laptop screen displaying a video call with Victoria Ashford. Victoria was reclining on what appeared to be a bed, wearing a red silk negligee that Sophia recognized with a shock of understanding. The garment was one of several items Sophia had found in Ethan's closet over recent months, pieces she had assumed were surprise gifts for her, perhaps intended for a romantic anniversary celebration or special occasion. The realization that these intimate gifts had been intended for another woman hit Sophia like a physical blow, but it was the conversation that followed that truly destroyed her. "I can't wait much longer, darling," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with practiced seduction. "I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending that you're happily married to that domestic little mouse. When are you going to end this charade?" Ethan's response was delivered with casual cruelty that took Sophia's breath away. "Soon, Victoria. Very soon. Once the baby is born and the divorce is finalized, we can finally be together properly. I promise you, everything I've worked for, everything I've built, it's all for our future together." "And what about the baby?" Victoria asked with the tone one might use to discuss disposing of unwanted furniture. Ethan's laugh was cold and calculating. "DNA tests exist for a reason. Darling, besides, I need a woman with real ambition, someone who understands the world I live in. Sophia was always just a temporary investment, beautiful, compliant, good for the image. But you, Victoria, you're my equal. You're what I've been searching for without realizing it." Sophia's knees buckled as the full weight of betrayal crashed over her like a tsunami. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from the venom of these words. The baby inside her seemed to sense her distress, moving restlessly as tears began streaming down her face. 7 months of carrying his child, feeling proud and protective when strangers commented on how lucky her baby was to have such a successful father. 3 years of devoted marriage, of reshaping herself to be worthy of his love, of believing in their perfect life together. 5 years of love that she had thought was as real and permanent as the mansion around them. All of it reduced to a temporary investment and a charade by the man she had trusted with everything. "I love watching you plan our future," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "Tell me again about the wedding in Scotland. Will you really buy that castle we looked at?" "Glencairn Castle will be perfect," Ethan replied with enthusiasm that he hadn't shown for anything related to Sophia in months. "A destination wedding that will make every magazine in the world. You'll be the most beautiful bride anyone has ever seen, and I'll finally have a wife who matches my success." Sophia listened in horror as they discussed not just their affair, but their detailed plans for a future that required the complete destruction of her life. They talked about the divorce proceedings, about how to minimize Ethan's financial obligations, about Victoria moving into the mansion that Sophia had turned into a home. "What about all her things?" Victoria asked with mock concern. "That woman has redecorated this place 3 times. Her taste isn't terrible, but it's not exactly my style." "Redecorate however you want," Ethan replied carelessly. "Money is no object. Besides, most of what she did was just safe. You have the vision to turn this place into something truly spectacular." The casual dismissal of years of Sophia's work, of the care and love she had poured into creating their home, was somehow even more painful than their discussion of the divorce. Every room in the mansion held memories of her efforts to build a life worthy of their love. Now those efforts were being dismissed as merely safe by the man who had once praised her impeccable taste and artistic vision. Sophia remained frozen outside the office door for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to them plan the systematic destruction of everything she held dear. When she finally managed to tear herself away, Her movements were mechanical, like a robot whose programming had been suddenly corrupted. She made her way upstairs to their bedroom, the master suite that Victoria had already selected as her future domain, and spent the remainder of the night in a state of shock that was beyond tears. The baby kicked constantly, as if responding to the stress hormones flooding Sophia's system, creating a physical reminder of how completely Ethan's betrayal extended beyond her to their innocent child. The next morning brought the storm in all its fury, but the meteorological chaos outside seemed mild compared to the emotional devastation that had taken residence in Sophia's heart. Dawn broke gray and ominous over Beverly Hills, with the approaching storm turning the sky the color of old bruises. Sophia had not slept. Instead, she had spent the dark hours of early morning methodically gathering evidence of her husband's betrayal with the cold precision of someone whose heart had been replaced by ice. The home office she had rarely entered, Ethan's private sanctuary, where he conducted his most sensitive business, revealed secrets that went far beyond simple adultery. Hidden in plain sight on his computer were email chains that painted a picture of calculated deception spanning months. Private investigators' reports on potential divorce strategies. Financial documents showing assets being quietly transferred to offshore accounts beyond her reach. Sophia printed everything with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had finally understood that love and trust were luxuries she could no longer afford. Security camera footage from their home's advanced surveillance system showed Victoria's overnight visits during Sophia's medical appointments, moments when she was meeting with obstetricians to monitor their child's development while another woman was warming their marital bed. The travel itineraries were perhaps the most painful discoveries. While Sophia had believed Ethan was attending international business conferences, he had actually been taking Victoria on romantic getaways to private islands, exclusive resorts, and luxury destinations that had once been their special places. The Maldives resort where they had honeymooned, the vineyard in Tuscany where Ethan had first told Sophia he loved her, even the yacht they had chartered for their first anniversary. Every happy memory was being systematically rewritten with Victoria as the leading lady. But the most devastating piece of evidence was a receipt from Cartier, not for jewelry Sophia had received, but for a custom engagement ring being designed for Victoria. The specifications described a 10-carat pink diamond surrounded by smaller white diamonds, with an inscription that read V.A., my true queen, E.S. The ring was worth more than most people's houses, and it was being created while Sophia carried Ethan's child and planned their future together. As morning progressed and the storm's intensity increased outside, Sophia made her preparations with the methodical calm of someone who had moved beyond emotional reaction into pure survival mode. She organized the evidence into neat files, each one labeled and documented with the precision of a legal brief. She understood instinctively that she would need every advantage in the confrontation to come. The breakfast confrontation took place in their palatial dining room, where they had shared countless intimate meals and planned their future together. The irony was not lost on Sophia that this space where they had celebrated anniversaries, discussed baby names, and dreamed about their child's future would now witness the destruction of everything they had built. Ethan entered the dining room at precisely 8 o'clock, following the routine that had structured their married life. He was dressed in a custom Brioni suit that cost more than luxury cars, his hair perfectly styled, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who believed his secrets were safe. His tablet was in hand, probably containing the day's business agenda, and he looked every inch the successful tech mogul that business magazines loved to profile. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said with practiced affection, leaning down to kiss Sophia's cheek in a gesture that had once brought her joy, but now felt like a violation. "You're up early. Is everything all right with the baby?" Sophia looked up at him, really looked perhaps for the first time in months. She saw past the handsome features and expensive grooming to the cold calculation in his blue eyes. The way his smile never quite reached them anymore. The subtle tension in his posture that suggested someone constantly maintaining a performance. "Ethan," her voice was steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her, "we need to discuss something important." She placed the first folder of evidence on the mahogany table between them, watching his face carefully for any reaction. For a split second, she saw a flicker of something concern, perhaps, or calculation before his expression returned to polite attention. Of course, darling. What's this about? Instead of answering immediately, Sophia opened the folder to reveal the printed emails between him and Victoria. The most damning ones were on top discussions about their future together, disparaging comments about Sophia, and detailed plans for the divorce that would facilitate their new life. Ethan glanced at the papers, and Sophia watched as his face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, irritation, and finally resignation. But notably absent was any trace of guilt, remorse, or shame. "So you found out," he said finally, his tone as flat and emotionless as if they were discussing stock prices. "I suppose this was inevitable." The casual dismissal hit Sophia harder than screaming or denials would have. There was no attempt to explain, no effort to salvage their marriage, no acknowledgement that he was destroying not just their relationship, but their child's family before she was even born. "Found out," Sophia's voice cracked despite her efforts to remain composed. "Ethan, I'm 7 months pregnant with your daughter. We've been married for 3 years. We've built a life together. And you're discussing me like I'm a business arrangement you're ready to terminate. Aren't you?" His response was delivered with stunning callousness. "Sophia, let's be honest about what this marriage has been. You needed security and status. I needed a wife who would look appropriate at company functions and charity events. It was mutually beneficial." Mutually beneficial. The words came out as a whisper because Sophia couldn't trust her voice at full volume. "I loved you. I gave up my career for you. I rebuilt my entire life around being your wife." Ethan stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked their perfectly manicured gardens, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that reminded Sophia of corporate presentations. When he turned back to face her, his expression held the same detached professionalism he might use to deliver quarterly earnings to shareholders. "And I compensated you well for those sacrifices," he said with chilling pragmatism. "You've lived in luxury for 3 years. You've had access to experiences and opportunities that most people could never imagine. You've worn jewelry worth millions, traveled to the most exclusive destinations in the world, and enjoyed a lifestyle that 99% of the population would envy. I thought those things came with love," Sophia said, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly where their daughter was stirring, perhaps responding to her mother's elevated stress. "Victoria has everything you lack," Ethan continued as if she hadn't spoken. "She understands the business world I operate in. She has ambition that matches my own. She can be a true partner in building something extraordinary, not just someone who arranges flowers and plans dinner parties." Each word was designed to cut, to diminish, to reduce 3 years of devoted marriage to the activities of a well-compensated domestic employee. Sophia realized with crystalline clarity that the man she had loved was either gone entirely or had never existed in the first place. "And our daughter?" she asked, placing both hands protectively over her belly. "What about her?" Ethan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness that Sophia had never seen before, not even in their worst arguments. "DNA tests are quite reliable these days, and even if the child is mine, I need a woman who can focus on supporting my goals, not someone whose attention will be divided by motherhood." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence, its implications so monstrous that Sophia initially couldn't process them. He was suggesting not just that he questioned their daughter's paternity, but that even if she was his biological child, she would be an inconvenience to his future with Victoria. Outside, the storm was reaching dangerous intensity. Weather alerts were being broadcast across the city, warning residents to stay indoors and avoid unnecessary travel. Wind speeds had reached hurricane levels, and the rain was falling in sheets that reduced visibility to mere feet. It was into this meteorological chaos that Ethan decided to cast out his pregnant wife. "I want you gone," he said with the casual tone he might use to dismiss an employee. "Today, Security will escort you out in 30 minutes. You can take whatever personal items fit in one suitcase. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. Ethan, there's a hurricane-force storm outside. I'm 7 months pregnant. You can't seriously be... I'm completely serious. He was already reaching for his phone, probably to call security. This house belongs to Sterling Tech Corporation, as do most of our assets. You'll receive whatever the court deems appropriate in the divorce settlement, but I want you out of my home immediately. The legal implications of his statement were almost as shocking as the personal cruelty. If the house belonged to the corporation rather than to them personally, Sophia might have no claim to it at all. She realized that Ethan had been planning this moment for months, carefully structuring their assets to minimize her position in a divorce. Please, Sophia stood, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and uncomfortable. If not for me, then for our daughter. The storm is too dangerous. Let me stay until... Our daughter Ethan's laugh was sharp and cruel. Sophia, I've been traveling constantly for the past 8 months. That baby could be anyone's. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that Sophia couldn't immediately respond. During the entire pregnancy, she had been completely faithful, completely devoted to their marriage and their growing family. The suggestion that she had been unfaithful was not just false, but psychologically devastating in its cruelty. You know that's not true, she whispered. I know that I need you gone before Victoria arrives this evening, he replied, already dialing security. The mention of Victoria's imminent arrival moving into their home, while Sophia was being forced out into a dangerous storm, added another layer of humiliation to the betrayal. Within hours, another woman would be sleeping in their bed, wearing Sophia's jewelry, living the life that had been ripped away without warning. Security arrived with the prompt efficiency of employees who were well compensated to avoid asking questions. James and Robert, who had been guarding the estate for 2 years and had always greeted Sophia warmly, now approached her with the professional detachment of people following orders they might personally disagree with, but were not paid to question. Ma'am, James said quietly, his discomfort evident in his voice. Mr. Sterling has asked us to escort you from the premises. Sophia looked around the dining room one last time at the fresh flowers she had arranged that morning, at the family photos that would probably be removed before Victoria's arrival, at the breakfast table where she and Ethan had once planned their future over coffee and dreams. Can I at least get my phone, some clothes? You have whatever you're currently wearing, Ethan said without looking up from his tablet, where he was probably already making arrangements for Victoria's permanent residence. Everything else belongs to this household. The cruelty was breathtaking in its completeness. Not just exile, but exile with nothing, no phone to call for help, no money to secure shelter, no clothes beyond the silk pajamas and robe she had worn to breakfast. In the pockets of the robe were only a few tissues and a lip balm, utterly inadequate for survival in the storm raging outside. As the security guards gently but firmly guided her toward the front door, Sophia caught a glimpse of herself in the massive mirror that dominated their foyer. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, pale, shaking, with dark circles under her eyes and the hollow look of someone whose world had just been destroyed. Mrs. Sterling, Robert said quietly as they reached the front door, his voice barely audible over the wind howling outside. Maybe you could call someone, a family member or friend. But Sophia realized with dawning horror that she had no one to call. In her 3 years of marriage, she had gradually lost touch with her college friends as their lives diverged along different paths. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving her with insurance money that she had donated to charity because Ethan's wealth had made it seem unnecessary. Her professional contacts had faded as she left architecture to focus on being Ethan's wife. She had built her entire support system around her marriage, and now that marriage was being revealed as a foundation of sand. The massive front door opened, and the full force of the storm hit Sophia like a physical assault. Rain lashed her face and body with stinging intensity. The wind threatened to knock her off her feet, and the cold penetrated her silk clothing within seconds. The circular driveway that had once welcomed her home from shopping trips and charity events now stretched before her like a path to nowhere. Behind her, the door closed with a finality that severed 3 years of her life in an instant. The sound of the electronic locks engaging was audible even over the storm, and she understood with terrible clarity that she would never enter this house again. The wind was strong enough to make walking difficult, especially with her altered center of gravity from the pregnancy. Each step was a struggle against forces that seemed determined to knock her down, and the silk pajamas that had seemed elegantly comfortable in their climate-controlled bedroom now felt like tissue paper against the elements. From the master bedroom window, the window that looked out over the very driveway where she now stood, Sophia could see Victoria silhouetted against the light. Even from this distance, she could make out the champagne glass in Victoria's hand and the smile of triumph on her perfect features. Victoria raised the glass in what appeared to be a mocking toast to the woman she had just destroyed. The psychological impact of seeing her replacement already installed in her home, celebrating her downfall, was almost more devastating than the physical danger of the storm. Sophia had been discarded so completely that her successor was already moving in before she had even found shelter. Sophia made it approximately 50 yards from the mansion before her strength began to fail. The combination of emotional trauma, physical exhaustion from pregnancy, and the brutal weather created a perfect storm of vulnerability that her body couldn't withstand. Her legs buckled, and she found herself on her knees on the sidewalk, rain soaking through her clothes and chilling her to the bone. The cold was becoming dangerous now, not just uncomfortable, but the kind of cold that could lead to hypothermia, especially for someone whose body was already stressed by pregnancy. Her teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and she could feel her core temperature dropping with each passing minute. But it was the psychological devastation that truly threatened to destroy her. The man she had loved completely, trusted absolutely, and built her entire life around had thrown her away like garbage. The marriage she had believed was the foundation of her happiness had been revealed as an elaborate lie. The future she had been planning for their daughter had been snatched away without warning or explanation. As consciousness began to slip away from cold and shock, Sophia's last coherent thought was a prayer that somehow, somewhere, there was still hope for her unborn daughter. That even if her own story was ending in tragedy, perhaps the baby she carried might still have a chance at the love and security she had tried to provide. It was then that she heard the car doors slamming and a warm male voice cutting through the storm like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Ma'am, can you hear me? We're going to help you." Through her fading vision, Sophia saw a black Mercedes sedan and two figures approaching with umbrellas, their forms wavering like mirages as hypothermia and shock took hold. Strong arms lifted her from the concrete with surprising gentleness, and she felt the blessed warmth of heated leather seats as she was carried toward safety. But what neither Ethan nor Victoria knew, what Sophia herself didn't yet know, was that the woman they had just discarded like trash was about to discover that she possessed resources beyond their wildest imagination. In her purse, which had been confiscated along with everything else she owned, was an unread message from a Singapore law firm that would change everything. William Chen, the grandfather she had never met, had just passed away, and in his will, he had left everything, all $10 billion of it, to his only granddaughter, the pregnant woman who was now fighting for her life in the backseat of a stranger's car. The grandfather who had cut ties with his daughter 20 years earlier when she married an American and moved away, had spent decades building an empire while searching for the family he had lost to pride. That empire now belonged to the woman Ethan Sterling had just made the biggest mistake of his life by betraying. As the Mercedes pulled away from the mansion, carrying Sophia toward a destiny she couldn't yet imagine, storm clouds continued to gather overhead. But for the first time in hours, those clouds seemed less like harbingers of doom and more like the dramatic backdrop for an epic story of justice that was just beginning to unfold. The wheels of fate were turning, and Ethan Sterling was about to learn that some betrayals carry consequences far beyond anything the betrayer can imagine. The man who rescued Sophia from certain death was no ordinary Good Samaritan, operating on simple human compassion. Marcus Chen, 32 years old with the quiet intensity of someone who had built fortunes while others slept, possessed the kind of understated power that whispered rather than shouted. His dark eyes held both warmth and the calculating intelligence that had made him CEO of Chen Industries before his 30th birthday. And the small scar on his chin, a souvenir from a helicopter crash that had claimed his mother when he was 18, only added to the aura of someone who had survived challenges that would have destroyed weaker men. Marcus had been in Los Angeles for 3 months, ostensibly for business expansion, but actually conducting a search that had consumed his family for 20 years. His father, William Chen, had spent the last 2 decades of his life building a pharmaceutical and technology empire, while hunting for the granddaughter he had never met, the child of the daughter he had disowned, in a moment of pride that had haunted him until his dying day. The irony was breathtaking. While Sophia had been living in luxury as the wife of a tech billionaire, her grandfather had been systematically building one of the largest private fortunes in Asia, driven by regret and the hope that someday he could make amends for the family he had lost. William Chen's empire spanned continents, pharmaceutical companies that developed life-saving medications, technology firms that held patents worth billions, and real estate holdings that included entire city blocks in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. When Marcus lifted Sophia's unconscious form from the storm-soaked sidewalk, he had no idea he was rescuing the very person his father had spent 20 years searching for. The recognition came later, in the pristine medical facilities of Beverly Hills Medical Center, a hospital that Marcus had quietly purchased 6 months earlier as part of his investigation into his father's past. As Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, suffering from hypothermia, shock, and the stress that threatened her pregnancy, Marcus discovered her identity through the medical intake process. The name Sophia Chen Sterling hit him like lightning. He had seen it written in his father's handwriting thousands of times, in legal documents, private investigators' reports, and charity donations made in her name to architectural programs around the world. In William Chen's private study in Singapore, Marcus had found evidence of an obsession that bordered on the supernatural. His father had tracked every major event in Sophia's life from a distance: her graduation from MIT, her early architectural projects, her marriage to Ethan Sterling, even her pregnancy. William had donated millions to causes she supported, funded scholarships in her name, and maintained hope that somehow, someday, he would find a way to reconnect with the family he had lost. "If you find her," William had written in his final letter to Marcus, "protect her as you would your own sister. Let her discover her strength on her own terms, but ensure she never faces the world without the tools to build whatever life she chooses. Pride destroyed our family once. Don't let it happen again." Marcus made a decision that would prove both wise and essential. He would reveal Sophia's inheritance gradually, allowing her to develop her own strength before discovering the full extent of her power. Someone who had just lost everything might be overwhelmed by suddenly gaining everything. And Marcus understood intuitively that Sophia would need to rebuild her identity before she could handle the responsibility of vast wealth. When Sophia finally opened her eyes 3 days later, she found herself in a modest apartment in downtown Los Angeles, a space that Marcus had carefully selected to provide comfort without ostentation. The apartment was clean, warm, and furnished with quality pieces that suggested middle-class stability rather than the luxury she had lost or the empire she had inherited. "You're safe," Marcus said softly, noting how her hand immediately went to her belly in the protective gesture that would become her signature. "The baby is fine. The doctors say you're both going to be okay." Sophia studied his face with the wariness of someone whose trust had been shattered so completely that she might never fully recover. Marcus saw intelligence in her dark eyes, along with a strength that had been tested but not broken. Even in her weakened state, even after betrayal and abandonment, she possessed a dignity that commanded respect. "I'm Marcus," he introduced himself with the carefully constructed story that would protect them both. "I'm a software engineer. I couldn't leave you in that storm." The lie came easily because it served a greater truth. Sophia wasn't ready to learn that she was one of the wealthiest women in the world. She needed time to rebuild her sense of self before she could handle the responsibility of that knowledge. Marcus would give her that time while ensuring she had everything she needed to survive and eventually thrive. "I don't have anywhere to go," Sophia whispered, her voice still hoarse from her ordeal. "I don't have anything." "You can stay here as long as you need," Marcus replied, meaning every word. "I'll take care of everything." But Sophia Chen Sterling was not someone who stayed down, even when life delivered devastating blows. Within a week of her rescue, despite Marcus's gentle suggestions that she rest and recover, she insisted on finding work. The determination that had carried her through MIT and launched her architectural career was still there, tempered now by necessity and sharpened by betrayal. The coffee shop where she took a job was 3 blocks from the apartment, close enough for Marcus to maintain discreet security while allowing Sophia the independence she desperately needed. Watching her serve customers with her growing belly, her face pale with exhaustion but her spine straight with pride, Marcus began to understand why his father had never stopped believing in this family's strength. Emma's birth came on a night when Los Angeles rain fell gently against the hospital windows, a stark contrast to the storm that had nearly killed her mother 2 months earlier. Marcus was there for the delivery, having somehow materialized with the best private medical team in California, a team whose services he explained away as excellent insurance benefits. When Sophia held her daughter for the first time, the transformation was immediate and profound. Emma was perfect with Ethan's striking blue eyes but Sophia's delicate features, and what promised to be formidable intelligence. More importantly, she was completely innocent of the circumstances that had brought her into the world, and Sophia understood with crystalline clarity that this child would never know abandonment or betrayal if she had anything to say about it. "Your father is a fool," Sophia whispered to Emma during those first precious hours, Marcus having tactfully withdrawn to give them privacy. "But Mommy is going to make sure you have everything you deserve." It was in that moment that Sophia began her transformation from victim to victor. Motherhood awakened something fierce and uncompromising in her, a determination that went far beyond simple survival into the realm of absolute commitment to creating the best possible life for her daughter. She began asking Marcus to teach her about business and investments with an intensity that reminded him powerfully of his father. At first, he hesitated. She was still recovering physically and emotionally, still nursing a newborn, still processing trauma that would have destroyed weaker people. But Sophia's insistence was impossible to ignore. "I need to understand how the world really works," she said with a determination that cut through his concerns. "I can't protect Emma if I remain naive about money and power." Meanwhile, the world beyond their careful sanctuary was moving forward in ways that would soon demand Sophia's attention. Ethan and Victoria's wedding had been the social event of the season, covered by every major publication and broadcast network. The ceremony aboard a $200 million yacht in Monaco Bay, with Hollywood stars and international billionaires in attendance, represented everything Sophia had once thought she wanted. But it was Victoria's interview with Vogue magazine that finally broke through Sophia's focus on simply surviving and rebuilding. Reading Victoria's words, "Ethan's first wife was just a stepping stone. Some women are born to be queens, others are just temporary." Marcus watched Sophia's face transform. He expected tears, anger, or emotional collapse. Instead, he saw something that made him both proud and slightly apprehensive: cold, calculating fury that reminded him exactly of his father when William Chen had decided to destroy a competitor. "Find out everything you can about Sterling Tech's current financial situation," Sophia said quietly, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I want to know their vulnerabilities, their cash flow problems, their dependencies. I want to understand exactly how vulnerable they really are." This was when Marcus knew it was time for the first revelation. He brought her a carefully curated selection of William Chen's letters that evening, documents that told the story of a grandfather's love and regret without revealing the full scope of the empire that now belonged to her. "There's something I need to tell you about your family," Marcus began carefully, watching her face as she read her grandfather's words for the first time. The letters painted a picture of a man consumed by regret and driven by love. William Chen had been a proud father who had made a terrible mistake in disowning his daughter when she chose love over duty. He had spent 20 years building wealth, not for its own sake, but as a way to provide for the family he hoped to someday reconcile with. Never bow your head to anyone. One letter read, "You carry the blood of warriors and builders. We were not born to surrender to circumstances, we were born to reshape them according to our will." Another passage resonated even more deeply with Sophia's current situation. If you ever face hardship, remember that strength is not inherited, it is forged in the fires of adversity. Every challenge you overcome makes you more formidable. Your enemies see only a woman who has lost everything. They cannot imagine the phoenix that rises from those ashes. With Marcus's guidance and what she believed was a modest inheritance from her grandfather, a few $1 million, Marcus had said, carefully understating the true amount. Sophia began her education in corporate warfare. She studied financial reports, learned about hostile takeovers and market manipulation, and discovered that Ethan's company was far more vulnerable than its public image suggested. Sterling Tech was hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate. The extravagant wedding, Victoria's expensive lifestyle, and several failed product launches had created serious cash flow problems. The company needed a $500 million infusion to complete their latest AI project. But investors were growing increasingly skeptical of Ethan's leadership, particularly after news of his abandonment of his pregnant wife had leaked to industry publications and social media. Phoenix Capital, Sophia decided, would be the name of her investment fund. The symbolism was perfect, like the mythical bird. She would rise from the ashes of her destroyed life and become something more powerful than anyone could imagine. Her first public appearance came 6 months after Emma's birth, at a technology conference where Marcus had arranged for Phoenix Capital to be represented. The transformation was stunning. Gone was the soft, accommodating wife Ethan had discarded. In her place stood a woman whose dark eyes held sharp intelligence and whose Armani suit spoke of serious money and serious intent. When Ethan and Victoria spotted her across the conference room, their reactions exceeded Sophia's most optimistic expectations. Ethan went visibly pale, his hands shaking as he gripped his champagne glass with enough force to threaten the crystal. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide her confusion and growing fear as she tried to process how the woman she had destroyed was not only surviving, but apparently thriving. "Sophia!" Ethan called out, his voice uncertain and lacking the confidence that had once defined him. She turned toward him with the cool assessment one might give to a mildly interesting piece of abstract art, acknowledged his presence with the slightest nod, and walked away without speaking. The dismissal was complete and devastating, not anger or hurt, but simple indifference to his existence. But when Sophia was introduced as the representative of Phoenix Capital, a mysterious investment fund that had just acquired 15% of Sterling Tech stock through a series of carefully orchestrated purchases, both Ethan and Victoria looked like they were seeing a ghost. After the conference, in the modest apartment that had become her sanctuary, Sophia received the call that would change everything. Marcus had been waiting for this moment for months, carefully monitoring her emotional recovery and growing strength, looking for the right time to reveal the truth about her inheritance. "Are you ready to know everything?" he asked as they sat in the living room where she had rebuilt her life from nothing. Sophia was holding Emma, who had grown into a beautiful, alert baby with her father's striking blue eyes but her mother's intelligent expression. The child was babbling happily, completely unaware that her mother was about to learn she was one of the most powerful women in the world. "What truth?" Sophia asked, though something in Marcus's tone suggested that whatever he was about to reveal would reshape her understanding of everything. "Your grandfather didn't leave you a few $1 million, Sophia," Marcus said quietly. "He left you 10 billion. Chen Industries, Chen Pharmaceuticals, Chen Holdings, all of it belongs to you now. You're not just wealthy, you're one of the richest women in the world." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information while Emma played with her mother's necklace. The revelation was staggering. but perhaps because she had already lost everything once. The prospect of having everything felt less overwhelming than it might have under different circumstances. Finally, she spoke with a voice as cold and sharp as winter steel. Then I think it's time Ethan Sterling learned what real consequences feel like. The campaign that followed was a masterpiece of strategic thinking and perfect execution. Over the next 3 months, Sophia orchestrated Sterling Tech's acquisition with the precision of a chess grandmaster playing against amateurs. Using shell companies incorporated in Switzerland, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands, Phoenix Capital quietly acquired Sterling Tech stock through dozens of different transactions. Each purchase was small enough individually to avoid triggering securities regulations, but collectively they were devastating, simultaneously. Sophia began recruiting Sterling Tech's most valuable employees with offers that were impossible to refuse. Dr. James Morrison, the AI specialist who had been Ethan's closest friend since college, was the first to leave after being offered 3 times his salary and equity stakes in Sophia's expanding technology empire. Why, Ethan demanded during a desperate phone call that James later described to colleagues as heartbreaking. We've been friends for 15 years. We built this company together. Because Phoenix Capital offered me a real vision for the future of ethical AI development, James replied sadly. And because you're not the man I thought I knew, Ethan, what you did to Sophia, that changed how everyone sees you. One by one, Sterling Tech's most valuable assets, its people received offers from companies within Sophia's rapidly expanding empire. Each departure weakened Ethan's company while strengthening her position, and the pattern soon became obvious to industry observers. Someone was systematically dismantling Sterling Tech from within. Victoria, meanwhile, had become increasingly paranoid about Sophia's sudden prominence in their world. She hired private investigators to dig into Sophia's background, but they found only carefully constructed layers of legitimacy backed by law firms and financial institutions that were beyond reproach. The investigators discovered that Sophia lived in luxury that rivaled their own and was frequently seen with an elegant Asian man who seemed to function as both advisor and protector, but they couldn't uncover the source of her wealth. She must have found herself a sugar daddy, Victoria concluded with characteristic cruelty, unable to imagine that a woman might achieve such success independently. No one becomes that wealthy that quickly without some man backing them. Ethan remained silent during these conversations, partly because he was beginning to understand that something far more complex was happening, and partly because he couldn't shake the memory of Emma's blue eyes that looked exactly like his own from their brief encounter at the technology conference. The day of reckoning arrived when Sterling Tech's board of directors called an emergency meeting to address the company's deteriorating financial situation. They needed new investors immediately, or the company would face bankruptcy within 6 months. The irony was perfect. The woman Ethan had discarded was now in a position to save or destroy the empire he had built. Ethan and Victoria entered the boardroom expecting to meet with representatives from various investment firms. What they found instead was Sophia herself, dressed in a black Chanel suit that made her look like an avenging angel, flanked by Marcus and a legal team from the most prestigious firm in New York. The woman who entered that boardroom bore no resemblance to the broken figure who had been thrown into a storm 7 months earlier. This Sophia commanded attention simply by existing, wearing power like other women wore perfume. Her dark hair was styled in a sophisticated chignon. Her makeup was flawless but understated, and she moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Good afternoon," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. "I'm Sophia Chen, chairman and CEO of Phoenix Capital." Victoria actually staggered, gripping the back of a chair for support as the implications hit her. "That's impossible. You can't be. You're nobody." Sophia's smile was beautiful in the way that winter sunlight on ice is beautiful, gorgeous but deadly. "I'm the person who currently owns 45% of Sterling Tech stock," she replied, placing a stack of legal documents on the conference table with the same precision a prosecutor might use to present evidence of murder. "And as of this morning, I'm prepared to purchase an additional 6% making Phoenix Capital the controlling shareholder of this company. Ethan's hands shook as he reached for the documents, his face growing paler with each page he read. Every document bore the seals of major international banks, top-tier law firms, and regulatory agencies from 3 countries. This wasn't some elaborate bluff or temporary scheme. Sophia had actually done it. How? The word escaped from Ethan's lips as barely a whisper. But in that single syllable was the complete collapse of his understanding of the world. Mr. Sterling, Sophia's voice was professional ice. I think you should address me as Ms. Chen. And to answer your question, while you were enjoying your new marriage and spending money you didn't have, I was discovering what I'm truly capable of achieving. She stood, and suddenly the boardroom felt too small to contain her presence. As the majority shareholder, I'm implementing immediate changes to Sterling Tech's leadership structure. Effective immediately, Mr. Ethan Sterling will resign as CEO and assume a consulting role at a salary of $200,000 annually. You can't do this, Victoria shrieked, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. Ethan founded this company. He built it from nothing. Mrs. Sterling. Sophia turned to Victoria with the kind of look one might give to an insect that had somehow found its way into a 5-star restaurant. You have no legal standing in this company whatsoever. I suggest you leave before security escorts you out. But Sophia had saved the most devastating revelation for last. From her Hermes briefcase, a briefcase that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, she withdrew a sealed envelope that seemed to glow with significance in the boardroom's fluorescent lighting. There's one more matter to address, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room with the authority of someone who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. Mr. Sterling, these are the DNA test results for my daughter Emma, conducted by Harvard Medical Center's genetics laboratory using hair samples I collected during your brief interaction at the technology conference. Ethan opened the envelope with hands that trembled so violently he could barely break the seal. The results were printed on official letterhead and signed by 3 different doctors, 99.9% probability of paternity. You have a daughter. Ethan's voice broke as the full weight of his abandonment crashed down on him like a collapsing building. I have a daughter, Sophia corrected, emphasizing the singular pronoun with surgical precision. Emma Chen. She doesn't need a father who abandoned her before she was born. The silence that followed was absolute. Board members stared at their papers, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes as the personal drama unfolded alongside the corporate takeover. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as everyone processed the implications of what they were witnessing. Sophia gathered her documents with the unhurried movements of someone who had all the time in the world because she controlled everything that mattered. As she reached the door, she turned back for one final devastating blow. You have 48 hours to make your decision, Mr. Sterling. Resign with whatever dignity you can salvage and retain 10% ownership, or I'll release the complete story of how you abandoned your pregnant wife during a hurricane to every major media outlet in the world. Believe me when I tell you that the story of a billionaire throwing his pregnant wife into a storm will be very interesting to journalists. Victoria followed Sophia into the hallway with the desperation of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. You think you've won? Ethan still loves me. He'll find a way to fight this. Sophia paused, considering Victoria with the mild academic interest one might show toward a particularly unimpressive specimen in a laboratory. Mrs. Sterling, I think you misunderstand the situation completely. I'm not fighting for Ethan's love. I wouldn't accept it if he offered it gift-wrapped with an apology. I'm simply ensuring that actions have consequences. Her smile was radiant and terrifying. I suggest you start looking for new employment. Something tells me your current position won't be available much longer. As Sophia walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of absolute victory, one question hung in the air like the scent of expensive perfume. Would Ethan surrender gracefully, or would he force Sophia to destroy him completely in front of the entire world either way? The abandoned pregnant wife had returned as an avenging angel, and she was no longer anyone's victim. 48 hours after the boardroom confrontation that sent shockwaves through the global tech industry, Ethan Sterling sat alone in his corner office, the sanctuary he had built over 15 years of relentless ambition and ruthless decision-making. The space that had once represented the pinnacle of his achievements now felt like a mausoleum, holding the remains of a life he had systematically destroyed through arrogance and betrayal. The walls displayed the trophies of his career awards from prestigious universities, framed magazine covers featuring his image, photographs with presidents and prime ministers, patents worth billions of dollars. But now these achievements seemed to mock him. Reminders of the man he had been before pride and lust had corrupted his judgment so completely. Hidden behind his computer monitor was a small silver frame containing a wedding photo from 3 years earlier, Sophia radiant in Vera Wang lace, her eyes bright with genuine love and absolute trust. He had forgotten the photo was there, overlooked when Victoria had redecorated his office to erase all traces of his first marriage. Now, looking at Sophia's face in that moment of pure happiness, Ethan understood with devastating clarity exactly what he had destroyed. The woman in that photograph had loved him completely, had rebuilt her entire life around supporting his dreams, had carried his child with joy and anticipation. She had been everything a man could want in a partner: intelligent, beautiful, successful in her own right, and utterly devoted to their shared future. And he had thrown it all away for Victoria, a woman whose beauty masked a complete absence of the qualities that made Sophia irreplaceable. Victoria burst through the office doors without knocking, her usually perfect appearance disheveled by 48 hours of panic and rage. Dark circles ringed her eyes despite expensive concealer. Her hands shook as she moved, and her voice carried a shrillness that revealed the desperation beneath her carefully maintained facade. "Ethan, we have to fight this," she demanded, slamming a stack of legal documents on his desk with enough force to scatter other papers. "Get the best lawyers money can buy. Call all your political connections. Use every favor you're owed. That woman cannot be allowed to destroy everything we've built together." Everything we've built. Ethan's voice was hollow as he looked up at her, really seeing Victoria clearly for perhaps the first time since their affair began. "Victoria, what exactly have you built? This company represents 15 years of my life, my vision, my work. Your contribution has been what redecorating my office and spending money on parties." "But I'm your wife," Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. "I supported you through this transition. I helped you see that Sophia was holding you back." Ethan studied the woman he had thrown away everything, for really looked at her with the clarity that only comes from complete defeat. Victoria was beautiful, ambitious, everything he had thought he wanted in a partner. But she was also selfish, manipulative, and incapable of the genuine love that Sophia had offered so freely. Where Sophia had built him up, Victoria had simply fed his ego. Where Sophia had challenged him to be better, Victoria had encouraged his worst impulses. "I think I confused desire with love," he said quietly, the admission painful but liberating. "And I destroyed something real and irreplaceable for something that was never anything more than an elaborate illusion." The realization was devastating but undeniable. Victoria had never loved him. She had loved his wealth, his status, his ability to provide the lifestyle she craved. Sophia had loved the man himself, had seen past the money and power to something worth cherishing. And in his arrogance, he had convinced himself that Victoria's calculated attraction was more valuable than Sophia's authentic devotion. Meanwhile, Sophia was facing her own moment of truth in the penthouse that had become her sanctuary. Emma, now 8 months old and crawling with determined enthusiasm, was playing with blocks in the living room while Marcus prepared dinner in the kitchen. The domestic scene felt surreal against the backdrop of corporate warfare, but it represented exactly what Sophia had been fighting for: a safe, loving home where her daughter could grow up, protected from the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed them both. Her phone rang, displaying Ethan's name on the screen. For a moment, Sophia considered ignoring the call entirely. She had said everything that needed to be said in the boardroom. The next move was entirely his to make, but curiosity about his decision, and perhaps a trace of the compassion that had once made her love him, convinced her to answer. "Sophia, it's me." His voice was barely recognizable, stripped of the confidence and authority that had once defined him. "I know who it is. Do you have a decision?" "Before I answer, could I, could I speak to Emma? Not as her father. I understand I forfeited that right, but could I just hear her voice?" Sophia looked across the room at Emma, who was babbling happily to herself as she stacked colorful blocks with the focused concentration that suggested she had inherited both parents' intelligence. The little girl had never known her father's voice, had never felt his arms around her, had never experienced anything from him but abandonment and rejection. "Emma doesn't know who you are," Sophia said finally, her voice neither cruel nor kind, simply factual. "She's happy and secure, and I won't disrupt that for your emotional convenience. I understand. I just, I need you to know that I realize what I lost, what I threw away, the magnitude of my mistakes." The words were pathetic in their inadequacy, but Sophia heard something in Ethan's voice that she had never heard before: genuine remorse. Not self-pity or manipulation, but actual understanding of the consequences his actions had created for people he had claimed to love. The next morning brought a media spectacle that would be remembered as one of the most dramatic corporate confessions in business history. Sterling Tech's conference room was packed with reporters from CNN, Bloomberg, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and every major financial publication. Ethan, dressed impeccably but looking years older than his 35 years, stood before the assembled press with the bearing of a man facing his own execution. "I am announcing my resignation as CEO of Sterling Tech Corporation, effective immediately," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to confess. "I am also using this opportunity to publicly apologize to my former wife, Sophia Chen, for actions that were inexcusable, unforgivable, and utterly beneath the standards that any decent human being should maintain." The press room erupted with questions, cameras flashing like strobe lights, but Ethan raised his hand for silence before continuing with his prepared statement. "I want to be completely clear about the nature of my failures," he said, his voice growing stronger as he continued. "I betrayed the trust of